The bubble indicator on my theodolite rested exactly between the black calibration lines, proving the earth beneath my boots was level. But the white wooden fence dividing my property from the one next door was mathematically. I had engineered a life devoid of chaos, and as I stared at that crooked fence line, the realization settled over me like dust on an unused drafting table. My life was so perfectly. She wasn't looking at the sunset or the manicured lawns. She was staring at a piece of heavy cream-colored paper in her other hand. I stayed where I was. Aesthetic standards. I don't even know what an approved heritage finial is, Carter. I walked over, my heavy boots crunching against the gravel. I stopped exactly 2 feet from the gate, maintaining a respectful distance. I didn't reach for the paper. I just looked at her. He can't enforce a retroactive aesthetic covenant without a 2/3 community vote, I stated plainly, the facts filing into my mind like architectural schematics. Let me look at the citation. She handed it over, her fingers brushing the edge of the paper but avoiding mine. The document was a masterclass in bureaucratic bullying, filled with vague statutes and aggressive deadlines. The antagonist wasn't a monster hiding under the bed, it was a retired accountant named Richard, armed with a clipboard and a desperate need for control. I folded the paper sharply along its existing crease. He's citing a code that was repealed in 2018, I told her, my voice dropping to a calmer, steadier register. I looked back up at her face, noticing the faint dark circle. She was wearing an oversized gray sweater, the sleeves pulled down over her hands, and she was swaying just slightly on her feet. He sent another one, she whispered, her voice thick. Certified mail. He said if I don't pay the back fines by the end of the month, he's putting a lien on the house. She stepped forward, crossing the threshold without waiting for an invitation. The fear rolling off her was palpable, raw, and exhausted. I can't lose this place. I finally got something that's mine, and I'm going to ruin it. I always lose it. She stepped closer. The proximity was sudden. She tilted her head up, her eyes seeking a lifeline, her body leaning into my space in a desperate attempt to find an escape from the crushing weight of the anxiety. She was trying to kiss me. It wasn't born of clarity. It was born of panic. I kept my hands firmly in my pockets. I stepped back, exactly 1 pace, denying the collision but maintaining eye contact. I didn't cross my arms. I didn't look away. I just established a wall of still, immovable air between us. Madeline, I said, my voice low, dropping the pitch to ground the frantic energy in the room. You are exhausted. You are terrified. And you've had wine. She blinked, the rejection hitting her like a cold splash of water, her cheeks flushing a deep, embarrassed crimson. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. Stop, I interrupted gently. I didn't let her spiral into shame. I held her gaze, offering nothing but absolute stability. My neighbor tried to kiss me when she was drunk. I'm stopping it. I paused, letting the silence do the work of calming the room. If you want, I'll make the first move. But not tonight. Tonight, you are going to drink a glass of water, and you are going to sleep. I will walk you back. She stared at me, her chest rising and falling in the quiet hallway. The embarrassment faded, replaced by a profound, sudden relief. I hadn't made her feel foolish. I had made her feel safe. The next morning, the sun glared harshly off the wet pavement. I walked over to her house at exactly 8 a.m., holding a thick manila folder and a thermos of black coffee. When she opened the door, she was pale, refusing to meet my eyes, her fingers twisting the silver ring on her right hand. Before she could launch into an apology, I placed the folder on her kitchen island. Section 4, paragraph 12 of the county zoning ordinance, I said, my tone strictly professional. bypassing the awkwardness entirely. I pulled the original cadastral maps from 1978. Richard is claiming your fence violates the setback rules. The setback rules are measured from the municipal right-of-way, not the curb. I opened a massive blueprint, smoothing the edges flat with my palms. I traced a blue line with the tip of my silver drafting pencil. He's measuring from the asphalt edge. The actual right-of-way ends 3 feet into the lawn. Your fence is compliant. In fact, his retaining wall is the structure in violation by 6 inches. Madeline stared at the complex grid of lines and numbers, her unworthiness complex battling with the hard, undeniable data on the table. He says he has the board behind him. He says I'm a nuisance. He has intimidation, I corrected, pulling a yellow legal pad from the folder. We have measurable reality. I began writing. Step 1. We file a formal dispute with the county surveyor's office today. Step 2. I request a cease and desist on the daily fines pending the surveyor's review. Step 3. We attend the HOA meeting on the 14th with a certified structural report. I mapped the timeline. I have the forms. I slid the pad toward her. She looked at the neat, capitalized letters of my handwriting. The tremor in her hand stopped. The chaotic, swirling thread of homelessness had been reduced to 3 actionable steps on yellow paper. She finally looked up at my face. You did all this? Since last night? I prefer things built on solid foundations, I said, capping my pen. A new constraint was locked into place. We were going to fight this, and we were going to do it my way. Over the next 2 weeks, her kitchen table became a war room of municipal codes and architectural history. We fell into a forced proximity that began to hum with a quiet, disciplined rhythm. Every evening at 6, I brought my laptop and laser measures over. She made jasmine tea, the floral steam cutting through the sharp smell of my graphite and printed paper. We didn't talk about the night she came over. We talked about load-bearing capacities and neighborhood bylaws. On a Tuesday, while she was on a stressful client call in her living room, I walked outside to the white gate. The screeching hinge was a symptom of a misaligned pin. I pulled a socket wrench and a can of industrial lubricant from my belt. I loosened the carriage bolts, recalibrated the pitch of the wood by a 1/4 inch to account for the seasonal swelling, and tightened the nuts until the torque felt perfect against my wrist. I swung the gate. Silence. It clicked shut with a satisfying, solid thud. I didn't announce it. I just packed my tools and went back inside, turning my longing into discipline, fixing the small fractures in her world because I couldn't yet hold her. She noticed it the next morning. I watched from my porch as she left for a meeting. She pushed the gate, froze when it didn't scream, and looked over at my house. I just lifted my coffee mug in acknowledgement. She smiled, a real, grounded smile, and the warmth of it hit me harder than a physical blow. The calm shattered on a Thursday. I was reviewing a load calculation spreadsheet when Madeline walked into my house, the screen door slamming behind her. She didn't have tea. She had a heavy, terrifyingly formal letter from a local law firm. Notice of intent to file lien, she read, her voice hollow, stripped of all resilience. 30 days. If I don't pay the $4,000 in back fines for the unapproved structural aesthetic, they start foreclosure proceedings. She dropped the paper on my drafting table. It doesn't matter what the maps say, Carter. He hired a lawyer. He's going to take the house. The external world came crashing into the quiet sanctuary we had built. The void in her eyes was back, the deep-seated belief that she wasn't enough to hold on to good things. I should just sell, she whispered, wrapping her arms around her own ribs. I should list it before he takes it. I always do this. I try to build something and I just ruin it. I stepped out from behind the desk. The noise of her panic was loud, deafening in the quiet room. I didn't offer a motivational speech. I didn't tell her she was strong. I walked up to her, stopped, and placed my hands firmly over hers, enveloping her trembling fingers. The sudden stillness in the room was absolute. It was the principle of the quiet room, my physical contact acting as a heavy lead-lined door slamming shut against the howling wind of the crisis outside. The frantic energy drained out of her shoulders. The tremor stopped. I wasn't holding her to feel her skin, I was holding her to transfer my stability directly into her panic. "He is using a boilerplate legal threat to bypass the county surveyor," I said, my voice low and steady, the facts acting as an anchor. "It is an intimidation tactic. The lawyer hasn't reviewed the county records. I have." I squeezed her hands once, a grounding pressure, then stepped back to give her air. "We are not selling. We are attending the board meeting on Tuesday." The relief was a fragile thing, but it held until Sunday. I was in my driveway, organizing the surveyor's tripod, when Richard walked down the sidewalk. He stopped at Madeline's property line, looking at the newly silenced gate. Madeline was on her porch, watering a fern. "It's a shame about the legal fees," Richard called out, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "You know, your engineer friend over there is putting on a good show, Madeline. But you do realize his house is the one encroaching on the city easement, right? If he exposes the property lines to the city, he gets fined. He's just using your dispute to grandfather his own property in. It's a conflict of interest." Madeline froze, the watering can hovering over the fern. She looked at Richard, then she looked across the lawn at me. For exactly 2 seconds, doubt flickered in her eyes. The unworthiness complex flared, the belief that no one actually helped her without a selfish motive. I felt a cold knot tighten in my chest. I didn't yell across the lawn. I didn't defend myself to Richard. I locked the case of my theodolite, picked it up, and walked into my house, shutting the door quietly. The trust we had built was a structure, and it had just taken a massive lateral load. If it couldn't hold, I couldn't engineer a fix for it. An hour later, there was a quiet knock on my door. I opened it. Madeline stood there, her jaw set, holding a printed copy of the HOA bylaws. "I shouldn't have looked at you like that," she said, skipping the pleasantries. Her voice was firm. She was stepping up, refusing the role of the victim. "I know who Richard is, and I know who you are. I'm sorry." I studied her face. The apology was real. The agency was real. "The easement on my property was vacated by the city council in 1994, I said, my voice quiet, giving her the data anyway. "I have the stamped variants in my safe. I would never use you as a shield, Madeline." "I know," she said, taking a step closer, leaving the doubt on the porch. The tension between us shifted from a fracture to a reinforced weld. "So, how do we destroy him on Tuesday?" The community center was harshly lit with fluorescent tubes that hummed with a low, annoying frequency. The HOA board sat behind a folding table. Richard sat in the center, a smug, bureaucratic king in a polo shirt. There were 20 neighbors in the folding chairs murmuring about property values and the rogue freelancer at number 42. Madeline and I walked down the center aisle together. We didn't sit in the back. We walked straight to the front row. When the public comment period opened, Richard adjusted his microphone. "Next on the agenda, the ongoing non-compliance fines for 42 Oakwood. Ms. Gardner, have you brought a check, or are we proceeding with the lien?" Madeline stood up. She didn't look at me for permission. She looked directly at the board, her voice echoing clearly in the silent room. "I am not paying a fraudulent fine. I am issuing a formal boundary statement on record. The citations against my property are based on fabricated measurements, and the harassment ends tonight." The room gasped. Richard scoffed, his face turning red. You are in violation of section. I stood up, holding a bound, 2-inch thick dossier. I walked to the table and placed it directly over Richard's agenda. Section 4, paragraph 12, I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs with absolute calibrated authority. I navigated the bureaucracy with precision. My name is Carter Dunn. I am a licensed structural engineer and certified surveyor. The document you are looking at contains stamped, notarized measurements of the Oakwood subdivision, cross-referenced with the 1978 municipal blueprints. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. I let the weight of the paper do the heavy lifting. Ms. Gardner's property is 100% compliant with city setback laws. Furthermore, I tapped the heavy document. The retaining wall, built by the HOA president at 40 Oakwood, is currently sitting 6 inches into the municipal right-of-way. It is an illegal structure. The room went dead silent. The fluorescent lights buzzed. If a lien is filed against Ms. Gardner, I continued, looking directly at the other board members, ending the leverage permanently, I will personally file this survey with the City Code Enforcement Office tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. The city will mandate the demolition of the president's wall at his own expense. I suggest a motion to dismiss all fines against 42 Oakwood immediately. I stepped back, allowing the reality of the data to settle. I didn't humiliate Richard further, I just dismantled his power cleanly and legally. The board members exchanged panicked looks. A motion was hastily made, a vote was taken. The fines were dismissed. We walked back to our street under the amber glow of the streetlights. The heavy, oppressive weight that had been sitting on the neighborhood for 6 weeks was entirely gone. The night air felt cool and clean. Madeline walked beside me, her hands tucked into the pockets of her jacket. You kept that variance information quiet until the exact right second, she noted, a quiet awe in her voice. A good structure relies on the correct distribution of force, I replied, my hands in my own pockets. You apply the pressure where it matters. We reached her driveway. She stopped by the white gate. It didn't screech when she rested her hand on it. She looked up at me, and the distance between us suddenly felt entirely artificial, an outdated boundary line that no longer served a purpose. She didn't look scared. She didn't look exhausted. She looked completely, entirely present. You told me once that you prefer things built on solid foundations, she said quietly. I do. I'm sober, she said, her eyes locking onto mine, clear and deliberate. I'm safe, and I'm not going anywhere. It was a public choice, witnessed by the quiet street and the porch lights. She took a step toward me, closing the distance. I took my hands out of my pockets. The restraint I had carried for weeks, the disciplined distance I had maintained to protect her, dissolved. I stepped into her space, bringing my hands up to cup her face. I kissed her. It wasn't frantic or rushed. It adhered to the absolute principle of the arrival. It was the feeling of locking a massive, heavy door against the chaos of the world and realizing you were finally on the inside. It was a destination. The wandering stopped. The silence in my perfectly measured life was suddenly filled with the profound, grounding weight of partnership. She leaned into my hands, her breath shaky, her shoulders dropping the last fraction of tension. We broke apart slowly, the cool air rushing back between us, but the tether remained. I looked at her house, secure and safe, and then at my own house, realizing it wasn't empty anymore. Closing thoughts. I learned that true integrity isn't just about following the rules. It's about using your strength to protect the vulnerable. Because winning the wrong way is actually losing. True victory is sleeping with a clear conscience, knowing love is built on safety, not chaos. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.